Hello, and welcome to Reddit Rewind, where we cover Reddit's most ridiculous stories. So today, our story is titled Crappy Boss Will Forever Regret Trying to Bring the Thunder. Backstory: I started working in care for the elderly before I graduated school at age 17 as a temp worker. And after I graduated, I basically worked full time for several years. Finally got a steady employment at age 23. I take pride in my job. And even though I didn't study medical stuff, I always made sure I know everything I need to know to do a good job. With online classes, certificates, reading up on medications, treatment recommendations, etc. Everything was going well, despite me having 4 different bosses in the first 5 years of work. No one wants to be the boss here. Economically speaking, it's a sinking ship, since it's government run and dependent on tax money. Then, friendly boss Lena joins the story. She asked me to move over to a new department the state was now, by law, obligated to provide short term care. She had previously run the emergency care unit at the local hospital, and she didn't take crap from anyone. She let us workers build up and run the department because, as any good boss should, she realized that we knew better what we were doing because we were doing it day to day and what worked best for us, as long as we stuck with the laws, regulations, staff requirements, and budget, of course. Everything was amazing for almost 2 years. Every month, I did the schedule for all 15 workers. I did daily planning for all patients. I was in charge of all documentation and all new guidelines and protocols being implemented, since the care provided was brand new in our area. Then the day of great sadness came when Lena declared that she was leaving, since she'd been offered a job as the head chief of a local hospital. All of us were devastated to see her go, but I mean, good for her. That's when super bitch Kaja enters our story. She was already the boss of all the normal elderly care units, whereas I'd worked before. I'd already moved on to short term care before she was hired as boss, and we had heard exclusively bad things about her. We heard she would always do what she thought was the right thing to do, which was almost exclusively wrong, because she was underqualified, had no experience from the actual work, and was just a bitch in general. Our first staff meeting, she told us, either you're with me or you're against me, and the people who are against me, I drown in the local lake. Okay, great start. I then tried to explain to her that with our previous boss, we'd worked with trust, since Lena had an understanding that us workers actually know what's best in our own department. And Kaja instantly shut it down. Kaja: no, I'm the boss. I set the protocols. I decide how my departments run. Me: yeah, of course, but I'm just saying we've been working like Kaja. No, I'm the boss. I'm in charge. And so it began. Kaja started changing the schedules, the protocols, the staff requirements, the daily rehab schedule, the food schedule, not joking, by the way. And she lowered the required medical competence to work at our unit. This means there were people working with us who had no prior experience in the job, had no prior experience in the field, barely spoke the language, etc. Keep in mind, we had dementia evaluation, palliative care, end of life care, stroke rehabilitation, and so on. Malicious compliance. Kaja started to try to micromanage everything we did. Literally everything. She canceled all the activities we did for the whole business, like pub nights for the elderly, movie nights and summer cafe outdoors, walks, store visits, everything, all without cost to the business. She stated that we're no longer allowed to finish the schedules on our own and gave us 2 weeks less to finish them, which means we now have 1 week to input the schedule, try to settle it between us 15 people, and then hand it to her. She'd finish it and hand it to us the day before it went into effect, and 8 to 10 shifts weren't covered. So we were 6 people working the same weekend. It's supposed to be 3. So I told Kaja that I've been managing the schedule for years and was happy to keep doing it, and that she'd still have it in 2 weeks early. Now, I told her that our activities were 100% within paid hours and no strain to the day-to-day normal business, and we wanted to keep doing them. Now, I told her that we'd prefer to keep doing things as we'd been doing them for years because it worked very well. Now, obviously, I was pissed. So were my coworkers, but they never spoke up. That was my job, I guess. There were a lot of incidents that I'm not going to bother bringing up, but just imagine that anything we ever wanted to do for our patients or the people in the dementia units or for the well being of the staff was just now. One thing that has been consistent since I started working there when I was 17, 27 at this point in the story, is that when you apply for vacation or any kind of leave, you input the leave request and then you request a temp to cover your shift. And then you inform your boss that you have done both those things. Always been like that. Always. So I did. I requested a day's leave. My mom had a doctor's thing in a town a few hours away from here. I input the temp request and then I walked to boss's office and informed her. She loses it. Maybe because Kasha's boss was there, I don't know, but she starts yelling, telling me that I'm not allowed to request temps. That's her job. I stand there and take it like a good employee and just say, okay, won't happen again. Big surprise for her when the next staff meeting comes around. There suddenly weren't any staff on the actual ward, and a local politician was sitting waiting with her mother, who was being committed to my ward that day for over 2 hours. I wonder who made sure they were arriving at that time on that day. I told my boss's boss exactly why there weren't any temps scheduled for the meeting. Kasha got fired. Will make me smile for the rest of my life. Edit. Acronyms and some spelling, I hope. Edit 2. Holy crap, this blew up. Thanks so much, everyone. Wow, well, what a crazy story. I can't believe this person who was so incompetent and this bossy and this ignorant and was so bad at doing her job was actually promoted to be the boss here, especially since they're dealing with medical care for people who have serious issues, dementia, stroke patients, people that need really competent care. I'm really glad there are people like the OP who are doing this work and busting their butts and doing it right, and that she did what it took to make sure that her boss, who was ruining the facility, and these people probably weren't getting the care they needed because of her, through OP's actions, got this Kaja fired. So I went through the comment section and found a few posts I thought were relevant. Here's the first one. Wow, it's amazing that you do so much without much medical background or training. It shows how dedicated and good you are at your job. You are pretty much running the place. If you have the means to go back to school and get a degree in something like health administration, you could be doing the same work and making much more, or even doing less work. As someone who works in the medical field, it's sad, but I've heard many stories from friends and colleagues about bad, underqualified, and inexperienced managers. Why wouldn't you listen to your workers? If everyone is complaining about the same thing, there's got to be something wrong. It's just so bizarre how disconnected and power trippy some people can get. And this touches on what I was saying earlier. It's so sad to see a facility where so many people are dependent on the services they provide being run by a really crappy, incompetent manager. And the fact that this individual who works in healthcare hears from his friends that this happens more often than none, or often with a completely unqualified manager, is sad. I hope this gets addressed in whichever country this person's from. So our next comment, sweet justice. One of the things I hate about these kinds of managers and bosses is when someone higher up than them says, they're new and just trying to get their style of management in place. Like it's your fault that you feel crappy and the new manager's just trying to fit in. If I ever become a manager, I'm going to try and see why things are done a certain way before changing anything. Understanding is key to finding actual problems and then solving those. Screw power trips. Yeah, with this comment, it was sweet justice. And he does give good advice at the end. If you are a manager somewhere, if you see a problem, actually find out why the problem is there before you provide a solution. Spend the time. Don't just suggest something because you feel it's right or just because you're the boss. That will only lead to poor service or poor production later on. So our next comment, she got what was coming to her. I work in the field as well. Even as a manager, I take all my staff's input and consider it. What was her deal? You actually sound like you'd rock as a manager or an assistant. Here, this comment is just giving the OP praise, saying that as a fellow worker in the medical field, sounds like she was doing an excellent job. The next comment, never understood the corporate mentality to move middle managers around between departments rather than promote the actual stars of the department to assume leadership. Talk about adding negative value. I never fully understood this either. I guess it depends on the company and the field of work, And I know in some company structures, they like to move the middle management from one field to another so that the middle management, if they ever move up higher in the company, can get a better idea of what the whole company does and not just their one department. So that's the logic behind that. So I've heard whether or not it's as productive and as good for the company as it is in theory, that's another issue. But obviously, in this case, from the OP story, it was not. And here's another comment that has to deal also with company structure. I used to work in manufacturing and we had similar issues. When a position would open up, it was almost guaranteed that they would promote our weakest performer for the position. The thinking was if you promote the best person, you will lose productivity. The worst person was barely doing the minimum, so they are easy to replace. I don't get that at all. If you want someone to be good at a job where they're managing other people, they have to understand the work and have been good at it themselves. Now, maybe it shouldn't be the best person so you don't lose that productivity, but it should be someone who is competent. I didn't get this thinking at all because it's, in a lot of ways, penny wise and pound foolish. And it will weaken your whole productivity from a management perspective, head down. And here's a continuation on that last comment. Hey, employee, you're really good at X. How would you like to stop being our most productive employee doing X? Is how they financially see it. And again, I interpret that as being very short sighted and penny wise and pound foolish. The very last comment is someone explaining the idea of why this doesn't work. You would actually want to hire someone who wasn't the best at that job, but maybe knew it in theory, and it's called the Peter Principle. So here's the comment. Well, because of Peter's principle, your best carpenter is actually likely to not be so good at managing carpenters. Those are different skills. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Sometimes you get someone who's so good at doing the handiwork and they get promoted until it becomes a management position where they have to do a lot of paperwork and people skills and not the actual working of the tool that they were good at before. And they are not prepared for that job. And then the whole department falls apart because you have a poor management who was only a good worker. It's a different set of skills, and that's something to take into account when you're promoting someone. Okay, guys, well, that's our story for today. I hope you liked it and let us know what you think about this story. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Till next time.